Fixers, hope you're having an awesome day. Is your mindset getting in your way of being productive? Head over to lifefixuniversity.com/mindset to take the free productivity assessment to see how you can change your mindset so that way it can go and improve and actually help you be productive instead of stopping you from getting things done. Now, for today's episode, we've got a crazy story. A couple who had some sort of not such fun challenges, major understatement. I wish no one ever go through anything even remotely similar to this. This is just a crazy story. I don't have words to say. I'm going to let Suzanne and Clark tell you their story. But I know that you will learn a lot from it and it will teach you so much. So let's do this. Thank you so much, Suzanne and Clark, for being here. You want to start by telling us how you guys met?
We met actually in church in a singles group. We sort of noticed each other at separate times, but we were in the same group. And we did a lot of, we called it group dating before we ever went out on a date between the two of us, and we were alone. In fact, I think the first date we had was after Thanksgiving, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, we met just the week before Labor Day. So it was the end of August. And then we did a lot of group dating with the singles group, and we would go different outings. We would have different outings and go different places, and Clark would always somehow wind up next to me, which was purposely, which was very nice. He was very entertaining. He's got a really good sense of humor, so hopefully you'll get a chance to see it. And so we went, he invited me to a ski trip the day after Thanksgiving. First, he invited me to Thanksgiving dinner with his family, his sister and his mother and a couple of cousins. But his sister didn't really know I was coming. So he just brought me and I showed up at the door. But she was very gracious and sweet. The day after Thanksgiving, we went skiing. And he skis very well. He's from Boston, and so he skied back east. And I'm from Colorado, and you would think that I would know how to ski, but I had never been on skis before. So that was an experience. And I ran into him a few times, and I don't like to ski. I found out I don't like it. I hate to be cold and I hate to be wet. So it's not my thing. But I think it was probably early December when we finally went on an actual date, just the two of us. And our relationship, it progressed really fast. We got married December 28th. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. Wow. So at what point did you get engaged?
I don't know. We talked about engagement, and then we talked about setting a date, and we said, how about next June? And then we thought, that's too long. How about March? And then Clark said, if we got married this year, we'd have good income tax deductions and we'd get a lower rate. So we decided to get married before the end of the year.
I love the way these tax rules work.
Yeah. So it was really wonderful. I mean, I was so in love. I'm sure Clark was too. It was a wonderful honeymoon period that we had for 6 weeks. And then our lives were destroyed, basically.
Before you get to the part with your lives destroyed, hold on. Sorry. Clark, do you want to share with us that early period when you were dating, when you were madly in love in that honeymoon stage, what that was like for you from your perspective?
Well, the thing that I remember was I'm always into antics, and I needed to see a dentist one of the times when I was still group dating, and Susan suggested her dentist, which wasn't very far from where I was staying with my sister. And so went there and met the nice doctor and had me fill out a form. And on the form, it asked, "Do you have any nicknames?" And so I put down Nick. I figured that would be a good nickname.
That's not his nickname. So the doctor was calling him Nick all the time. I couldn't stop laughing. and he couldn't figure out why we thought it was so funny. So yeah, Clark was always doing things like that. It was very funny. He had
Clark's
me in
never
stitches
boring with
all the
him
time.
around.
Yeah.
So anyway, one of the first times we had a date, we were on the telephone and I was talking with Susan for a very long time.
6 hours.
Yeah. And then she invited me over to her apartment because she said she had milk and I like chocolate milk. So I was going to bring the Nestle's Quick and she was going to make chocolate milk for me. And I got over there and guess what? She didn't have any milk.
Yeah. I knew I didn't have any milk, but when he said, "Do you have any milk?" I was afraid if I said no, he wouldn't come over. So I said yes, lured him over there, and I didn't have any milk.
And he still trusted you after that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that was some of the antics that we both pulled on each other, and it's endearing and infuriating at the same time.
Well, when it's coming from both of you, then it's more okay, I guess, or way more fun.
Yeah, we really had a lot of fun. It was, and we still do. In fact, that's probably why we've been able to stay together so long, because he is hysterical. He says some of the funniest things and I can't stop laughing. And I guess he appreciates me laughing at him.
Yeah. Anybody can laugh at me, I suppose.
Not laugh at you, laugh at your jokes.
Yeah.
Okay, so tell us, what happened when your lives were shattered?
Oh, that was horrible. My 9-year-old daughter, actually, she was, she had just turned 9, 4 days before this happened. I went off to work and I got a phone call in the middle of the afternoon. And some lady on the other end of the line said, "We need you to come down to the social services department. We have your daughter." And I just couldn't comprehend what she was talking about. I have 2 daughters. The older one, we'd kind of been having a little bit of problems with her. She was about 15 and, she had a boyfriend. And so I figured if they had my daughter, they were talking about Amber, my older daughter. And so I said, "Well, why do you have Amber? Why isn't she in school?" And they said, "No, we have your other daughter. We have Emily." So then I was really upset because I thought, well, why? I mean, that makes no sense at all. So I rushed down to the Department of Social Services building. I went and they ushered me into this room. The lady proceeded to tell me that they we're going to hold on to Emily and put her into a foster care situation because Clark had molested her. And it just absolutely threw me. I mean, I had absolutely no thought in my head that anything like that could ever happen, that they would ever tell me anything like that. So they made me leave without Emily. And I went home and waited for Clark to get home. And when he got home, I was crying the whole time that I drove home crying. I was at home crying. He saw me sitting on the stairs crying and he asked what was wrong. And I could barely get it out, but I finally told him what the Department of Social Services said, and he was just crushed. I mean, I could just see it in his face that because Emily had just adored Clark. She was just all over him all the time, just because he's just a big kid, and she was a kid. So they played like kids and she just adored him. So I thought, there's something wrong here. If I could just talk to her, maybe I could figure out what's going on, because I couldn't figure out where it came from. But I said, there's no sign. I saw absolutely no sign whatsoever that Clark was the kind of person who would molest a little girl. So he said, of course, that he didn't do it. And I believed him because it made no sense. And also, the other odd thing about it was when I asked the lady at social services, I said, well, what did Sarah say he did? And she said that Emily, what did Emily say that he did? And Emily said, he tickled me. And I said, well, where did she say he tickled her? And the social services lady said, well, in the stomach area, around the belly button, and in the chest area. And I'm thinking, chest, 9-year-old, she's flat chested. And then I remembered stuff like Clark, for example, Sarah or Emily would throw her arms around his neck and hang on for dear life and would not let go. And Clark would tickle her armpits to get her to let go, because she was just hanging on like a monkey. And he would throw her, up over his shoulders and walk around, and she loved it. And she would just be screaming with joy. But they just played together, and it was a joyous thing to see. So this was totally devastating. And we didn't know what to do, because the lady said, if you get a lawyer, you're going to look guilty. She said, only guilty people get lawyers. So she also said, you have to kick Clark out of the house and force him to move out, or you're not going to get Emily back. We won't allow her to be back in the house or in the same room with Clark. And that she said they would monitor everything. Anytime I was ever with Emily in the future, they were going to monitor that. So I was allowed to have twice a week visitations with her at the social services building for an hour. And that was it. And
well, before you continue this
Yeah.
atrocious story, what was Emily's side of her story at this point?
we didn't know. We didn't know. It was weeks before we found out what had happened and why they said and they thought that she was molested. It turns out that she had been having a little bit of difficulty with the teacher. She felt like the teacher didn't like her. So I encouraged her to talk to the teacher, let her know, hey, I feel like you don't like me. Can we, talk? So I was trying to encourage her to, be bold and talk to the teacher about it. And when she did, the teacher brought up her home life and said, well, what's going on at home? And she said, oh, I have a new daddy. So that started the whole thing. As she said, she had a new daddy. She said, and then they brought in, so they reported it. Back in that era in the 80s, if you did not report even just a small suspicion of child abuse, you could be prosecuted. So people were reporting child abuse, right and left, because they did not want to be prosecuted. And they were safe from being sued if they reported it and it was something completely false. They couldn't be sued by anybody. So they were safe in reporting it. So the teacher told the principal said, you have to report it. Then they brought social services around, and I guess there was a time when she denied it at first, it sounds like, from what we understand from reading all of the transcripts. But they had policemen with them when they were questioning her, and she got scared. So she started agreeing with they said, he touched you here, and she would nod her head and, agree with whatever they said, because she was just afraid of the policeman. And
yeah, before you continue that, do you know that there's a lot of, I'm not here in any which way to put down people who have been abused, because there's a lot of that, and that people need to think, but there's crazy statistic. I don't know the exact number, but of people who go to therapy, and because the therapist try to talk to them in such a way, they convince them that they have been sexually abused. Yes. And even though it never happened, it started things start happening in the brain that they actually feel like it had happened.
Exactly.
So it makes a lot of sense what you're saying. Okay,
Yeah,
continue.
that's right. And they put her into incest therapy. That's what they called it. So they immediately, of course, will assume you have been abused. And then any sign of her being upset, they said, well, that's because she was abused. Well, no, that's because she was
It's a 9-year-old
away from her mother and
Yeah.
stepfather who she loved. And her sister, I mean, she was, torn away from her family. I felt so bad for her, really bad. So it was a very difficult decision not to force Clark to move out. He agreed to move out if we thought it was the right thing. But the lawyer that we ended up getting, and also a psychologist that we talked to, said, no, don't move out, because they will take that as an admission of guilt and they will just prosecute you, even worse. And they ended up charging him. Well, he went in to talk to Department of Social Services. He figured he could get it straightened out. And well, he asked for something written down that showed what he was accused of, and they just laughed at him. And when I went in to talk to them separately, they said, well, you've got to force your husband to admit that he abused your daughter. And they said, well, how do you know he abused her? And they said, well, because he says he's not guilty. Everybody who is guilty will say that they're not guilty. And I said, well, what do innocent people say? So, we were going around in circles. And then they said, well, we're not really in the business of guilt or innocence. We're in the business of putting families back together. I said, well, why aren't you putting our family back together? And they said, because he won't admit his guilt. So, it was crazy. I felt like, and I talk about this in my book, I felt like had been dropped on an alien planet. Things were just so bizarre. And we eventually got to a point where he was charged with a felony. And he kind of joked around. Of course, he's, good joking person. Between he and I, we called it felony tickling. But the penalty was 16 years in prison. It was crazy. And
I was charged with what was it?
Sexual assault on a minor by a person in a position of trust.
Yeah, that's what it was.
Yeah.
What was it like from your perspective, Clark, to be accused of something that you haven't done?
Well, after about a week of dealing with this, I finally told Susan, it's really not worth me staying here if Emily can't come home. And I wanted her to be able to come home and stay with her mother, because my sister and brother-in-law, lived just a few miles away. And just when I was saying that, Susan at some point got either she made the call or got a call from her ex saying that he found out about the situation and he was furious, and he's taking charge. And I believe he got physical custody of her.
Then he got custody. I had suggested in the beginning, don't put her in a foster home, put her with her father, even though he wasn't the greatest father. If anybody was abusive, he was more so, much more so. More of like emotional abuse, psychological abuse, that kind of thing. That's the reason why we didn't stay together. And but he ended up having her, which I felt better about, because the foster care, the foster home she was in was not a good home. She told me some things that happened there, and I was really worried about her. So at least she was in a situation where I knew who she was with. So that part was better. So then there was no reason for him to move out of the house. So he stayed. And we hired a good lawyer. We had to go to court all of the time. Every time we turned around. The lawyer we
got was a civil case lawyer.
Yeah, I think it was a corporate lawyer, actually, because he didn't really do.
The criminal attorneys didn't want to take my case.
That's right.
Because
they said he needed to just admit that he did it. They said, we can't defend that because they thought they would not be able to win it.
Mhm.
Because it was the way it was back then. If you were accused of child abuse, then everybody believed that you were guilty. There was no way that they believed that you could be innocent. So we finally found an attorney, a corporate attorney, who listened to our case, and he was a nice Christian man. And I knew he felt sorry for us, and he took our case. And he worked really hard, really hard on the case. And so we had to go to trial. They offered him, here's the weird part. When it got closer to time for trial, the prosecution offered him what was called a deferred prosecution, which is almost like dismissing the charges, but not really. What they do is they say, okay, in the next year, if you do not commit any crimes, then we'll drop the charges. And so then you're more or less, not guilty. But
Right.
Clark wouldn't do it. He said he did not want that. He wanted to prove that he was innocent. And that made the judge really mad because Clark did not accept the plea bargain. So the judge sent us, he sent our case, all of our paperwork and stuff. The judge felt like our attorney was not giving Clark good advice because Clark was supposed to take a plea bargain. So he sent all of the paperwork to his former law partner to review, to see that, and to try to convince our attorney to force him to take that plea bargain. And
you forgot one other thing.
Yeah,
I also
what?
had to have a psychological evaluation
Oh
done.
yeah, we all had to be psychologically evaluated. And so all of that information was given to this other lawyer. And he wrote a letter back to our attorney, and he said, normally I would tell you this is open and shut. He should just go ahead and accept this deferred prosecution. But he said, in this case, it's very clear that Mr. Gabriel is not guilty. And then he went through like 7 different points, reasons why he said he's not guilty. And he said that if the prosecution does not just outright drop the charges, that he recommends that Clark go ahead and undergo a trial. And then he also recommended that afterwards that we sue everybody. So,
That's nice.
yeah. So,
Nice plot twist.
yeah. Well, so that made the judge even more angry. So then he told our attorney privately that he was going to throw the book at Clark if Clark did not accept the plea bargain, and he was going to give him 16 years in prison.
So what happened? Is that what ended up happening, or
we went to trial?
Yeah, it was.
We went to trial
3 or 4 months later.
Yeah, and we were able to get enough information about what they were going to say, what Emily was going to say on the witness stand, and they didn't want her to be there, but she needed to be there because we found out what story it was that she was telling, and it was a story obviously that somebody else had made up and had convinced her to say, because I'll tell you what happened. They said this, Emily got on the stand and she said that Clark touched her one time when she was in her sleeping bag on top of her bed, and he reached down, he unzipped the bag and reached down and touched her between the legs over her underwear. That was the what he was being charged with. And so then I got on the stand, and my attorney, of course, we knew exactly what we were going to say. He said, okay, is this a plausible story, Mrs. Gabriel? And I said, this is impossible. It could not possibly have happened. And he said, why not? And I said, well, that week, Emily had just gotten a new waterbed for her birthday. And she also decided she was going to sleep in the sleeping bag on top of the waterbed. And it's a mummy style bag. So there's no way that Clark could have sat on this little 1-inch wide frame and unzip the sleeping bag and reach down, to touch her between the legs. It would be impossible. So, that was the story. And it was and then that was pretty much the end of the trial. At that point, it was the climax.
Yeah,
And
but I did go on the stand.
yeah. Oh, you did. I forgot about that. Well, see, I wasn't
Well,
allowed
you
to
weren't
watch.
allowed in there.
I had to sit in the
Why?
hall because they didn't want any of the witnesses to see what the other witnesses were saying, because they could
Yeah.
kind of you
Yeah.
could
Mhm.
make your story
Right.
fit. Yeah.
Mhm.
So what did I forgot all about that?
Yeah, I went on the stand and told whatever was asked of me, and looked directly at the jury. And it wasn't very long after that I did my testimony that the trial was ended, and the jury went out to deliberate. And it didn't take very long for them to come back and say not guilty also, which probably frustrated both the prosecution and the judge.
Yeah, I think it was just a few hours. It was, they said, and then our attorney talked to the jury afterwards and asked them, well, what was your process? What happened? And they, right after they first got together, they decided to take a poll, say who thought that Clark was guilty and who thought he was not guilty. All of them, except for one person, thought he was not guilty. And this other person was holding out because she kept saying, but what if there's something that the prosecution wasn't allowed to present and we didn't get to know about it? What if there was something else? And the rest of the jury just said, you can't just assume there was something else. You have to go with what was presented, and that's it. You can't, hold out for that reason. So they finally convinced her, and like I said, came back not guilty. But here was an interesting thing. When we were standing there and they said not guilty, I mean, I was like, oh God, I started crying with relief. But the jury, they dismissed the jury, and they came over to us and hugged us, and they had tears in their eyes, and they said it was so awful that you guys had to go through that. We feel so bad for you. And that made me cry more, because I was just in, so much shock, because you just assume that everybody believes you're a child abuser and they hate you. So it was a very moving.
So after that,
Mhm.
I'm thinking, okay, when do we get our youngest daughter back? And they say, oh, that's a different trial.
Yeah, they said just because he was found not guilty doesn't mean he's innocent. So that's the Department of Social Services thing. And they brought what they call a dependency and neglect action against me for allowing Clark to abuse Emily.
Yes,
right?
that's exactly what you did. Mhm.
Yes. And then when we found out, of course, he was not guilty, how can I possibly be guilty of something that, he was found not guilty for? So, but they decided they were going to go right ahead and pursue it. They were all so mad that we did not go along with, what they wanted us to do with agreeing.
And the other thing that was really annoying me about this whole situation, the bills kept coming in for foster care.
Oh yeah. Her attorney
for Emily, and the guardian ad litem, since he's court appointed, he gets to bill whatever time he spends with her, or looking at the case, or discussing it with social services. So we're getting all of these bills for something that I was found not guilty of.
Right.
And now I have to go to the administrative law court because it's a civil case, and it's going to be a lower burden of proof for them to prove that I was guilty.
Right. And so they wanted to take all of my rights away, never allow me to have custody of Emily again. And that was their side of the case. And about 3 weeks after the trial was over, I found out I was pregnant. So it was kind of a traumatic moment.
Yeah.
But they decided they were going to continue pursuing this thing. And I kept, so we all were going to therapy because it was all being forced on us by the court too.
Was the therapy at least helpful, or it wasn't good
it was
therapy?
awful. It was terrible. It was ridiculous.
It was a social service. What do they call it? A sociologist.
Yeah.
Was guiding us.
Oh, it was just all ridiculous, but we were forced to do it.
Mhm.
So I was pregnant.
Oh, and I had to pay for that too.
Yeah. Oh, of course. Everything. We paid for everything. And about 1 year later was when we had to go to court, the final court for dependency and neglect. And about 3 days before the court, I had an appointment with the obstetrician, and I found out the baby had died. So they could not do surgery and remove the baby until like after. It turns out it was on a weekend, so they had to wait and do it the following Monday. And Monday morning was when this dependency and neglect hearing was going to take place. And I was going to go Monday afternoon in to have surgery to have the unborn baby removed. So it was
Yeah, we had to go to a separate hospital
horrible.
because the hospital you were going to at the time was a Catholic hospital.
Oh yeah, well, it's the way it goes.
Yeah.
Emotional roller coaster.
It was awful.
So one of the things that I did before we went to the administrative law hearing was I wrote a very scathing letter about the guardian ad litem and how much he's costing the family and how we can't get back together because my funds are getting depleted. And I with the words that I used, it really annoyed the guardian ad litem and the judge. The judge finally wound up saying, all right, GAL, you can stay on the case, but we're not going to pay you anymore.
Yeah.
So it took him about 35 seconds to decide, well, I don't need this case anymore.
Yeah. So we got rid of him,
Yep.
but still, we were still forced to go to therapy. And I was so devastated by the loss of the baby and everything that had been happening that I said, all right, I'll sign the paperwork. But, so what I agreed to was to give up my custody of Emily and agreed that we would go to therapy and that she would not be able to be alone with Clark or even with him, even in my presence either, until after the therapist said that we had been to enough therapy, right? So she was in charge of our life at that point. Her name was Beth. And
I don't like that name. Just saying.
I don't either.
Beth's listening. Nothing personal, but
Yeah,
my association with other Beths.
Yeah. So so I was suspicious. I figured she's going to drag this thing out as long as she can because she's got money train coming in here. It was therapy with her stepfather, therapy with her father, with her stepmother and with her mother, and then all of us together. And then separately with one of us, I counted, it was like 98 therapy sessions. And a year later, we're still in therapy. And she's still writing these letters to the court saying that we need more therapy. But I had them put a clause in that we were allowed to get a second opinion if we felt it had drug on too long. So we immediately, after a year, of that, it had been 2 years. They had taken her, she was gone for 2 years. And so then we got another psychologist and he evaluated it and talked to her, evaluated her and said, she should be immediately reunited. There did not need to be this anymore dragged out therapy. So at that point now she's not allowed to actually come and live with me again, but she could come for visits on a weekend when Clark was there without anybody supervising. So that was great. I mean, that's the first time we actually got to spend time together with her for 2 years. And, here's the thing that I worried about. I really worried that Emily and Clark would have a really hard time because of all of the things that had happened. They would have, their relationship would have been damaged from it. But, it did not take long at all. I mean, Clark forgave her and she forgave Clark, and whatever it took, they were back, being best buds again. So
but what did it do for Emily, the fact that this whole situation, like she was a little kid who was just talking about what happened at home, and all of a sudden her whole life's destroyed.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we continued with therapy for her, but not with this therapist.
Good thing.
We had a decent therapist who continued therapy with her. And, we spent a lot of time with her. And also by this time, Clark and I had started a nonprofit organization for people who had been falsely accused of abuse. And so we were at this point working really hard to try to change the laws, because we found out what was going on with the laws, found out that that was really the reason that all of this started, and the reason why everybody was getting accused of abuse back then. So I was getting a lot of publicity at that point. I got the attention of a national magazine, and they wrote up a story about what had happened to us. And that got the attention of someone who was writing a book. And so he wrote a book, and then he went on the Today Show to publicize the book. And the Today Show called us and wanted us to also be there and talk about it. And so it was really, really a fun situation and a fun time, because
more cathartic than anything else.
It really was. It was, just being able to talk about it and to get everything out. And Emily, like I said, she loved Clark, and they got along great. And eventually Clark and I were invited to be on a task force to change the laws, to rewrite the laws. So we were working with the Department of Social Services director, with the district attorney, with a variety of lawmakers, and we were on a committee to work with them to rewrite the laws. And I became actually friends with the director of Department of Social Services.
The same director
friends. The same one. We're still friends today. We exchange emails pretty frequently. So things are. You never know what things can happen that you never expect.
Yeah. What has it done to your own relationship, your own marriage? This whole crazy story.
Well, that's not the end of the story. Do you have another hour? Because
not another hour, but another bit. I do want to hear more of your story.
Yeah, I'll tell you what happened. Because we were at a point where we lived in Colorado Springs, and I mean, I was so well known. Clark was really well known. We couldn't go anywhere without being recognized, and we're introverts, and that was something that wasn't easy for us. And then I was getting called all the time from media asking, they would ask this question that always used to irk me. They wanted to get a comment from the other side whenever there was an abuse case. Like I'm the other side, like I'm in favor of abuse. And I kept saying, I'm not the other side. I am opposed to abuse, and I'm especially opposed to the abuse that the child abuse industry has put on people when they take children away without doing an adequate investigation. So, I got a chance to speak and say what I wanted to say, but they always would say that. We want a voice from the other side. I say, go find somebody who wants to abuse children, and you'll have the other side
find
of it.
Pedophile, yeah.
Right. So I was just getting tired of it. So I told a friend of mine at work that I really wanted to move away from Colorado, and I got a job offer in Dallas, Texas. So Clark had the kind of job where he could really get a job just about anywhere. And we were all ready to move. We all were getting kind of tired of the whole thing. And we hadn't had a chance. When you think about it, we had a 6-week window of marriage when we were not either accused of child abuse or all wrapped up in vocal and working with other people who were accused of abuse. And that went on for, let's see, well, it was probably about 9 years. We finally got a chance to move to Dallas. And then I got a job, and the job that I got was unfortunately at the point of imploding. They operated Job Corps centers, and an investigative reporter was doing an investigation on the Job Corps Center in McKinney, Texas, and it was the expose. I mean, it was terrible. She was showing like supposedly sex orgies, the kids were being supplied with drugs by the residents, so it was a really bad situation. And I was the director of marketing, and so it was my job to go out on the radio and defend this. And I mean, I just got the job. I didn't know anything about what was going on, so that was very stressful. So I did the best I could. And then one day I went into work, and there was someone there who said they wanted to talk to me, and they were the FBI. So, oh my gosh, now I'm going to be investigated by the FBI. And so they started,
fun.
Yeah, so they started asking a bunch of questions about our how did we handle our material, our pricing, all that kind of thing. And I did not know what they were talking about, and I just answered the best I could. But for a while, I knew they were tapping my phone because I could hear noises in the background. So it was very stressful. I was, like afraid I was going to end up in prison over the whole thing, and having known nothing about what was going on. But that finally started, getting, they decided to close the operation in Dallas, move everything back to Florida. And they found the person who was responsible for, he was giving our pricing material to the competition, is what he was doing. So they dealt with that. They wanted me to move to Florida to work in Florida, and I did not want to go. So I did not want to work with that company anymore. So I found another job. And also by then I was just still so stressed out. And I went to the doctor, and he suggested that I go to a psychiatrist and maybe get some medication. And so I did. And he prescribed an antidepressant, which I took. And within 6 months or so of taking it, I completely changed my personality. I was not an introvert anymore. I was an extrovert. All I wanted to do was to go out and have fun. I was awful. I was not a good person. I became promiscuous. I went out and I dated. I was still married, and I would go out on dates. And I mean, even today, I can't even fathom doing anything like that because it's so outside of my personality. But I was taking this antidepressant, and later found out that I was taking too much. He had prescribed too much of it. It was beyond the amount that was recommended. And then I found out also that some of the side effects are that it will do this. It will change your personality, and that you will become, that you won't care about anything. You become reckless behavior. Some people become gambling addicts. Some people become sex addicts. I mean, there were quite a few things that could happen on this particular antidepressant. So I moved out. I divorced Clark. I ended up marrying somebody else who was a manic depressive, and when he was manic, I found that interesting and exciting, and I left Clark in the dust. But he would still talk to me. I mean, he was still nice to me. There were times I would go over to borrow something, and he still treated me decently. And he should have treated me crappy after what I did
what
to
was
him.
your train of thought, Clark, on
Can
that?
you believe it?
I didn't have a train of thought. I just thought, she's dealing with whatever she is dealing with. I can't change who she is. I can't change what she is thinking. I was just mostly depressed because, she was my soulmate.
Yeah, it was. And eventually the doctor took my medication down to about half of what it had been. And I started turning back into myself. And I would lay awake at nights just crying, missing Clark and wishing that we were back together again, and thinking that there was no way he would take me back because of all of the things that I had done. And I was just beside myself. It was, just awful. And then one day I went over to visit him, and I was really sad about something. And so he put his arms around me to comfort me, and he started crying, and I started crying, and he said that he really missed me, and that he had always thought that we would grow old together. And I was like, oh my God, I can't take that anymore. So I went back to the guy that I had been married to.
How long was that? Did the marriage last for?
2 years.
Okay.
Told him that I was leaving, and he could have the apartment if he wanted to pay for it. I was moving back out. But we weren't getting along very well by then either, because he was dating. We were married, and he was dating. So it was a good time to split. But that whole thing, to me, it's like a movie. It does not seem real to me, any of that. It is all, and I think Clark feels the same way. It's all just like a dream that never happened. But I thought about in the book, I thought, I could end the book with happily ever after. Clark was, found not guilty. We got Sarah back. We changed the laws. Everything was hunky dory. And then end the book and not go into the part where I went nuts. But I thought that's not really honest. That's not really the whole story, because to me, the story of my book, and it's right here, story of my book, the story behind my book is forgiveness and love. And so that's why, we're on your show, because we've been through a lot. And the fact that we're still together, I've been married a total of 50 years. And 36 of those have been with Clark. So we've been together quite a long time. And, I don't know what to say about giving people advice on how to stay married, other than I think there's a couple of things. One would be marry somebody that you can understand, or that you understand, and that you are in love with. Don't marry somebody because it's time to get married. Find somebody that makes you laugh, that you're madly in love with, and that you can live with for a long time. Because the kinds of things that someone does, the habits they have, some of those kinds of things you can get around the fact that he's he's very regimented about certain things. Well, I get used to that. It's not a big deal. But the really important things, we have the same values. And I think that's extremely important. We have the same value system. We both find the same things funny. And that works for us, because most other people don't find it funny. We have a lot of things that we enjoy doing together. When we watch TV together, and we talk during the middle of the show, which a lot of people don't like, but we talk, and we have personal jokes about it, and talk about how we need to train the cops, because every time we see a show with cops on it, they always let the guy run. They always, we see these things all the time, and we talk about what we need to do, how we need to train the people, and how we need to rewrite the show. So
yeah, they're always 100 feet away from
anything.
Yeah, they're always 100 feet away from the suspect that they're trying to go after, and they say stop FBI or stop
and they're
police.
like half a block away.
Yeah.
Why wait till you get up close to the guy? Don't do it a half a block away. They're going to run. So it's stupid. And then the thing he never lets me live down is that I ruined The Sixth Sense, the movie, the I See Dead People movie. About 20 minutes into the movie, I figured out the guy was dead. And I leaned over and I said, you know what? The guy's dead. And he said it totally ruined it for him. So now we joke about, if one of us guesses what's going to happen, you ruined it for me. Now you ruined it. So
you guys are so good. It's so funny and so much energy and like enthusiasm, even after all the years and all that you've gone through.
Yeah.
So, this has been awesome. Before we get to our final question, where could Life Pixers connect with you, learn more about you, get your book?
Okay. My book is on Amazon there. I have a website that's really easy to remember if you know my name and my web address. If you ever want to write to me, first of all, the website is what my name is here, Susan Louise Gabriel. And I had to add my middle name because there's another Susan Gabriel out there who writes books. And she's an author too. So I am Susan Louise Gabriel. And that's the name of my website, susanlouisegabriel.com. And my email is just slg@susanlouisegabriel.com. And if anybody wants to write to Clark, you can write to me and I'll pass it on.
Awesome. Okay, we'll put those links in the show notes. So final question, one that I ask everyone is, how would you describe an extraordinary relationship without using love? For you, I'm putting in forgiveness and laughter.
Can't use any of those.
And fun. You can't use fun either.
Can't use any of those.
None of it.
Trust.
Understanding.
And you said forgiveness you can't use. Caring. How about wonderful?
Maybe some Alka-Seltzer.
Well, thank you so much, Susan and Clark, for being here. I know you guys are introverts, and it's a little bit hard to talk about this, but it was really, 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 really inspirational and a really good learning experience for all of us. So thank you.
Good. I hope so.
It's nice meeting you.
That's all for this episode of the Life Pix University podcast, but I have a huge favor to ask of you that will not only support the show, but will also help the people you love most. We are striving for 1 million downloads by the end of 2025, and we can't do this without your help. If you love this episode, please share it with 2 of your family and friends so they too can rewire their brains to have an extraordinary marriage. It was awesome spending time with you, and I'll see you on the next episode.